Oh, fuck me. You're up and running. You're gonna make sure everything's good. Yeah, YouTube seems to be fine. And the Twitch is fine. Hey, Baba Booey. Baba 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 Booey. Make sure everything's good. Then we'll go to that end. The YouTube stream's dog shit. Nice. Whatever, bro. Whatever. Let's see here. Alright, cool. Alright, kings and queens. Let's get to it.
Race and restructures dominated ACT's rally at the weekend. Here's their plan for smaller government. They've announced a policy or a promise that 43 government departments will shrink down to just
fucking neck me, dude.
19. So more than halved. They promised that 28 ministers and 78 overlapping portfolios will drop to 18 ministers. Ministers will also have much more control over who runs the departments. They can appoint a fixed-term CEO and remove a CEO under certain circumstances, but independence will remain for agencies like police, defence, the SIS. In their policy document, ACT claims the Public Service Commission will no longer act as a gatekeeper between ministers and key appointments. And it comes as the party itself announces a key personnel change. Nicole McKee is the Deputy Leader and she joins us live this morning. Nicole, good morning.
Good morning, Ryan.
Good to have you on the program. Now, I watched your speech yesterday with interest because you mentioned in there, I own my whakapapa. My whakapapa is mine to own. What prompted you to talk about that, just to mention that in your speech?
Well, what I've found over my last 3 years as a minister in this government is a lot of rhetoric around what type of Māori that I am. If I don't fit into a certain type of camp, then I'm either not Māori enough or I'm a plastic Māori, or just a whole lot of abuse about the type of Māori that I am. At the end of the day, I am Māori, Ryan. I'm half Māori and I'm half British, and I'm really proud to have that combination of my heritage. And for people to come and try and tell me what type of Māori I am, I think is a bit low, really, and actually speaks more volumes about them. That's why I said my whakapapa is mine. It's a heritage that I am absolutely proud of, and I want to inspire and promote aspiration and opportunity for every other Māori and New Zealander out there. And that's my role as the new Deputy Leader of the ACT Party.
Nicole, who's they? When you say they are coming for you, they are calling you a plastic Māori, who?
The woke mob.
The detractors. And you know what's really quite disappointing is the majority of them are other Māori. They feel that because I don't think along the same lines as them, that I must be racist or plastic or whatever. I think actually there's a lot of people out there, a lot with Māori ancestry, that feel the same way that I do. And I'm going to speak about it because I'm sick of being told I'm not Māori enough.
Fair enough. Now let's talk about some of the plans that you've got for, shrinking the state, the size of the state, I should say. Because I actually think National's got this the wrong way round. They're reorganising the public sector, but you need a shake-up at the top first, surely, to set the direction, which they haven't done yet. 78 portfolios, 80 portfolios, Nicole. Countries like Norway, countries like Ireland have fewer than 30. Even big countries like America have around 30, something like that. Why is it we have so many, and can you realistically get that number down?
Well, I think we can realistically get that number down. I think we need to for New Zealand's benefit, again, in order to open up opportunity. If you have a look at those number of portfolios, 78 portfolios, I mean, for goodness sake, we're a country of 5 million people. We've got 43 departments. If we start condensing these down and actually getting down to core business,
Just fucking blow my brains out, dude. Yeah, New Zealand has 5 million people and has like 40 something departments. Luxembourg is 24, and what's the population? Luxembourg's population. It's just like blow my fucking shit smooth off, dude.
instead of the nice to haves, let's start spending taxpayer money on what we need to have so that we can operate in a better way. I mean, what really stands out for me, Ryan, is when we spend over $30 billion a year on health and we're not getting anywhere, and we're a country of 5 million. So do we have too much bureaucracy around that? Look at the justice sector as an example. We have a Minister for Courts, that's me, a Minister for Justice, a Minister for Corrections, a Minister for Police. Why don't we have one minister doing all of justice and law?
Yeah, it's like, why doesn't the chef just prepare all his ingredients, cut all his shit, fry all his shit, make all his shit, prepare all his shit, and serve the customers? Come on, dude. It's the same. It's just blatant stupidity.
Consolidating it down and get down to the business that's going to help New Zealand advance and give us the opportunities to be a wealthier society.
Nicole, it's very hard for me to argue with what you're saying, but you guys brought a new ministry and minister to the table in the last term of government. You added regulation.
We did, and in that adding of that regulation, the Ministry for Regulation, we've actually managed to get rid of a lot of red tape.
Yes, but Nicole, this is what everyone says. Whether it's Judith Collins in space or whether it's Winston in rail, everyone says, oh, but my ministry is the best ministry, therefore we need a new one. This is the problem with politicians. So I mean, I like what you're saying, but I just don't think you've got a hope in hell of ever making it happen, because you can't help yourselves.
Well, I think this is where you start looking at where do you consolidate, Ryan. I mean, you still have the work that's been done. You don't say we're going to get rid of corrections or we're going to get rid of police. What you say is that you bring them all together and you have them consolidated under one. And that's something that the Ministry for Regulation would look at. When I say they've been cutting red tape, they absolutely have. And that's exactly what ACT has been doing. In the AML sector, which I'm in charge of, I have cut so much red tape. Brooke Van Velden has done the same. We've also got red tape cut underneath the pharmacy or pharmaceutical.
You've got RSI from cutting red tape. I get it. You've been doing a lot, Nicole.
Wait till we get through the RMA, Ryan. When we get through the RMA, we're going to have more than RSI.
Hey, I want to talk about very briefly about the beneficiary things, the changes that you've announced, and putting payments on cards. So if you're on a benefit for more than 4 months, everything goes onto a card. You can only get groceries, you can only get rent, you can only get things that you would consider appropriate for a beneficiary to be buying on a job seeker. But you're also right into hunting. And hunting is a great way to feed your whānau. Can you buy guns and bullets with your benefit card?
Well, I doubt that you would actually have enough money on a benefit to be able to purchase a firearm, especially nowadays. And the way that prices are going, ammunition is also becoming quite hard to purchase. But one of the things that we have said with this electronic money management card is that there would be carve-outs.
You're like Captain Hunting.
For people for certain things.
Nicole, so there would be...
Captain Hunting.
I said you're Captain Hunting, yeah. Like, you're a great hunter, you're a great shooter. We know this about you. So surely, I mean, if you're on a benefit, you want to go out and hunt to feed your family, give them some kai, there's no problem with that, is there?
Well, from my perspective, there's absolutely no problem with that. And if you are on a benefit and you need help, you'd go see your MSD person and say, I can get out there and hunt, and I need to be able to purchase ammunition.
All right. Appreciate your time this morning, Nicole. Thanks so much for being with me. Nicole McKee, who is the ACT Party Deputy Leader as of the weekend.
Billionaires, they are richer today than they've been in decades. But according to economists like Gabriel Zuckman, they do not pay their fair share in taxes. While average Americans pay an effective tax rate of about 30%, Forbes' 400 richest individuals pay only 28%. And paradoxically, in Europe, things are even more extreme. Whereas middle-class Europeans pay around 50% in taxes, billionaires pay only about 20 to 30%. However, every time someone talks about taxing the ultra-rich, you always hear the same response. They will simply pack up their bags and leave to Monaco, Switzerland, Dubai, or any other country that offers a better tax deal. The UK tried taxing the rich in the 1970s and it lost the Rolling Stones and David Bowie. France tried in 2012 and lost Gérard Depardieu. Norway tried in 2022 and faced a significant exodus of billionaires. On the other hand, the Lego and Maersk families famously stayed in Denmark after it abolished its wealth tax in 1997, and when Sweden did the same in 2007, it famously saw the return of icons like IKEA founder Ingvar Kamprad and Björn Borg. The political right argues that taxing the rich is simply a bad deal because if they leave to flee high taxes, they will take their companies and jobs with them. And if enough leave, this could even mean that by raising taxes on the wealthy, the government ends up collecting fewer taxes overall. Now the left will counter that this is nonsense. Sure, a few may leave, but wealth taxes will still help fund social policies, and billionaires don't produce that much value anyway. So if some leave, they leave behind a more equal, harmonious society. Now the problem is that nobody knows at which point higher taxes on the rich become self-defeating. So the debate ends up dominated by sensationalist headlines and anecdotes. Luckily for us...
No, just started drinking, Simon. Also, my YouTube is super behind. I don't know why. Today is one of those days where my YouTube stream has decided to fuck itself. The stream is good now, but it's been flip-floppy, so just be careful. But yeah, I just started drinking, brother. Just started drinking. We're looking at the... You weren't in the stream for this, so you didn't see it, but we reacted to a Ryan Bridge interview of the ACT lady, the gun lady. She was basically talking about the whole thing of like how ACT wants to cut like all of our ministries, basically, and like combine them. And it's just such a stupid thing. Because I think like Luxembourg has a population, like, because their argument is like, there's 5 million people in New Zealand, why do we need 43 ministries? Luxembourg has like 700,000 people and they have 24. It's just like just tracking the logic, you know? And like Luxembourg obviously has a more prosperous society than us, at least.
A new study in the prestigious journal American Economic Review dug into an extraordinary amount of Swedish and Danish administrative records to see how the wealthy actually respond when the wealth tax changes. And this means that for the first time we now have evidence-based calculations on how many billionaires will leave, what happens to their businesses and the economy as a whole if you truly tax billionaires where it hurts. So before we settle the debate between left and right once and for all, we need to start with the tax that the ultra-rich hate the most. You see, most millionaires and billionaires do not earn their income by working for a wage. Instead, they make most of their income by far from their capital, their properties, their stocks, and their private companies. But while it's pretty straightforward to tax wages and dividends...
I just watched that Macrofi. Oh, damn. Yeah, no, this guy does some really good stuff. I really like watching his stuff on economics. This, and there's another channel called How Money Works. There's like 2 channels that I watch quite a bit when it comes to finance stuff. They do really good research and a lot of good like evidence-based stuff. Also, Simon, another thing. You can find the link on my Twitch, but I finally made a Discord for the community. So if you want to join it and you want to do some like, you want to post some shit or do some like funny stuff, you can. That's a thing now. The YouTube to battering, and you've still got Nicole McKay, and I'm gonna watch your Twitch. Based.
Evidence, it's actually quite difficult to tax so-called capital gains as the price is going up for two
Yeah, as I said,
reasons.
the YouTube
First
stream is
reason
way
is
behind.
practical. The asset class that billionaires benefit most from are private companies. Take billionaire-owned IKEA from Sweden or Lego from Denmark. What are these companies worth? Since they are not regularly traded, nobody is really sure. Now, the second reason that wealth taxes are difficult is political. You see, while companies that are traded, like Elon Musk's
Macro is very good.
SpaceX,
Yeah, no, as I said, like macro and financing and how money works are like the two channels I really love when it comes to global finance stuff. They do some really good work. I think there's another channel. I forget what it's called. It's How Money Works. There's like another one called like fuck, I forget its name. Oh, Economics Explained. Right here. Yeah, Economics Explained. These guys do some really good stuff. For finance.
To value, they can
But macro for me is like top tier.
For example, just a few days ago, Elon Musk was the world's first trillionaire. But as of recording this video, SpaceX already lost so much value that Musk's personal wealth dropped by 13% in just 2 weeks. And that means that the government, if they tried to tax his capital gains at 30% just 2 weeks ago, his tax bill now could have been 50% instead. Of course, you could argue that in the case of Musk, he will be fine, but given that most governments want a predictable tax system, they have chosen to only charge a capital gains tax when such gains are realized. That is, when billionaires themselves choose to sell their assets. But what if you never sell your assets, your stocks, and your company, and you
Economics Explained is
never
good. Yeah, as I said, there's like those three: Economics Explained, How Money Works, and macro and financing. They do some really good stuff.
dividends? Well, in that case, you can sit and watch how your assets appreciate while never worrying.
Like, as much as I'm into geopolitics and stuff like that, it's like a secondary to my economics. I'm a big economics loser. I love economics.
about paying any taxes at all. And that's why Warren Buffett famously said that he paid less taxes than his secretary. He could just hold onto his stocks, watch them grow and borrow against them to finance a comfortable lifestyle without ever paying a dime in taxes. Now, to avoid these kind of tricky issues, many economists argue that it would be simpler if workers pay an income tax while the
I per se have an amateur interest in economics. Yeah, like I should be fair. Like, I'm not like an educated economist or whatever. It's just like I like economics for me. Like, I'm a big econocrat in politics. I feel like all political stuff, socially and ideologically, is just downstream of economics. Like, as economic conditions get worse, you just see extremism rising, stuff like that. That's kind of like my interest in economics. So like, it's not like I have like a fundamental understanding of economics more than like someone who had an education in it. It's more like I understand certain terms, certain words, certain applications, and I apply that to my political view, basically.
super wealthy simply pay a small percentage on their total wealth, a wealth tax.
If you're extremely wealthy, you have to pay a minimum each and every year, no exception, and that minimum has to be expressed as a fraction of your wealth.
If properly implemented, billionaires absolutely hate wealth taxes because these cannot simply be dodged by never paying out dividends or not selling shares. Therefore, wealth taxes typically cause a lot of billionaires to complain about them first, and if that doesn't work, they threaten to leave. And because most billionaire wealth is tied up in financial markets and private businesses that can be fairly easily moved out of the country, and we live in a world of free trade and capital, and therefore the easiest way to escape a wealth tax is by simply moving to another country and taking your firm with you. But do billionaires actually do this? This is where Jacobsen and her co-authors' new research paper comes in. Both Sweden and Denmark used to have an annual wealth tax of around 2% on net wealth. Denmark abolished it in 1996 and Sweden in 2007. Both countries had pretty sophisticated systems to measure wealth and can track how many wealthy residents were emigrating each year. And this allowed researchers to calculate exactly how much you can tax billionaires before they
Yeah,
leave.
from what I understand, Simon, I'm pretty sure doesn't Norway currently have an exit tax, which is technically like a wealth tax, but it's like if you pull out of Norway, you have to pay like something like 30% of your current wealth to the government or something to leave. I'm pretty sure I read that in like a report, and Norway has like that kind of wealth tax, like an exit tax.
So, the answer from Sweden and Denmark, it seems to be, even if you raise the wealth tax a little bit, some billionaires will leave. So, how much can you tax them before they leave? Some will always leave. It's more about how many will leave. Concretely, after Sweden abolished its 2% wealth tax, it saw a reduction in 34% of wealthy people leaving. Now that may sound like a lot, but consider this. Only 0.34% of the ultra-rich Swedish were emigrating every year before the tax was abolished. So even with a wealth tax, over 99% of wealthy Swedes preferred staying in Sweden. So because only a tiny number of billionaires emigrate each year, this means that a 1% increase in the top wealth tax rate decreases the stock of wealthy taxpayers by about 2%. But this relatively small fact could be because the Swedish wealth tax had a unique feature, we have to be honest. It fully exempted, so it didn't count assets held in private corporations. And that means if you were a 1990s startup founder in Stockholm and you never had to sell your shares, you could breathe easily because the value locked inside your company largely escaped this wealth tax. On the other hand, in Denmark, which the authors also looked at, private companies were not exempt. So you'd expect a much bigger effect of abolishing the wealth tax there, but that was not the case. The authors found roughly the same effect. A 1% increase in the top wealth tax decreased the stock of billionaire taxpayers by about 2%. So the result was actually pretty robust across borders. And therefore, if we apply the main result of this paper to, for example, the UK Green Party's politicians Zach Polanski's 2% wealth tax proposal for all wealth over £1 billion, then the evidence from Sweden and Denmark implies that the UK will lose 4% of these wealthy taxpayers. Now, importantly, what does that mean for wealth tax revenue? Well, doing a quick back-of-the-napkin calculation, there were 156 billionaires in the UK in 2025. Together, they controlled around £654 billion. And given that 156 billion in wealth would be exempt from the 2%, there would roughly be 498 billion left to tax. Now we could calculate that just 4% of UK billionaires will leave, and therefore there will be a slightly lower wealth tax revenue, but that would be too simple. Because billionaires don't just pay wealth
Taxes,
they
yeah, the
also
consumption,
pay other
yeah.
taxes, primarily income taxes. Luckily, the researchers also took this into account for Sweden and Denmark and estimated that for every dollar, krona or pound won in wealth taxes, about only 22 cents are lost on other taxes from billionaires leaving. And based on these numbers, the UK wealth tax should bring in about 498 billion times 2% times 78% is 7.8 billion pounds every year. That's a significant amount of money. The government of the UK could use this to really fully fund their plan, that's already there, to buy 8 new battery factories, 6 clean steel plants, 9 renewable ready ports, and a hydrogen electric plant, and several net zero clusters. That's great news. But on the total government budget of 1,368 billion pounds, it's pocket change. It's roughly 0.5%. So while the right is correct that wealth taxes cause billionaires to leave, the best evidence that we have shows us that the left is correct that not enough billionaires leave to offset the wealth tax. But that intellectual victory is really slim if you consider that we are talking about just 0.5% of the government budget. To make matters worse, we have only considered the effect of billionaires leaving on taxes. But as you can see here from this graph of Sweden, most people do actually work for the rich and for the ultra-rich, either directly as an employee or indirectly as a contractor. So this gets us to our next major question about taxing the billionaire class. Will rich people leaving hurt the economy? Again, the Sweden paper offers a very interesting insight. The researchers could actually follow what happened to the businesses that these wealthy emigrants left behind. And the picture is not pretty at first glance. When a business owner subject to the wealth tax left the country, their company took a real hit. Jobs fell by a third, investment dropped by a fifth, and the value of the firm produced shrank by a third. The taxes it paid were roughly cut in half. To put it in plain terms, an owner leaves and the company they built will start to decay. But on the bright side, because so few wealthy people were actually leaving because of the wealth tax in the first place, abolishing the wealth tax barely affected the economy as a whole. We're talking a few hundredths of a percent on jobs and investments and about 0.2% on the size of the economy. At the level of the whole country, the effect of the tax exodus was almost invisible. So, taxing the ultra-rich does not bring in much money, but it also does not crash the economy. So, we should just do it anyway, right? For the sake of fairness. Well, hold on. There's one feature of wealth taxes that we don't actually talk about that much in public debate, but surprisingly it came out of this research paper as the real problem with wealth taxes, which is that private firms that are not listed and are therefore hard to value because they're not traded, they are the real problem. For example, even a country like Norway that tracks almost perfectly even how much your car collection is worth.
220 is a good YouTube channel. Maybe you might have a look in the future. 2and20 is that like the name of the YouTube channel?
Billion.
Oh, so it's a bit of like a pop economics channel. Okay, I might give it a look later.
They were not able to properly value private firms. Therefore, they ended up valuing them based purely on hard assets like buildings and bank accounts in the firm. But because the real value in most firms comes from intangible stuff you cannot touch, like a brand or technical know-how and customer loyalty, these firms ended up being structurally undervalued by governments. And this then created a massive incentive for the billionaire class that stayed behind, which are most of them, to try and dodge wealth taxes by moving their wealth from things that can be valued, like stock markets and property, into private companies that are difficult to value. And as we've seen, private firms are a substantial share of billionaire wealth, much larger than property, for example. Another good example is Spain. When it reintroduced its wealth tax in 2011, they exempted business assets along with primary residences, where people actually live, from the tax base. That sounds reasonable. You want to protect small business owners and homeowners. But what actually happened, there was a massive reallocation of wealth towards private firms and massive villas. Someone holding stocks would sell them and buy a house. Someone with diversified investments would shift into business shares of private companies. And as a result, the wealth tax base collapsed by between 42% to 51% after the introduction of the Spanish wealth tax. And this is exactly what the Sweden-Denmark paper also found. Remember that 22 cents lost to people fleeing the country for every dollar taxed? Well, the wealthy who stay put cost the treasury more than twice that, roughly 54 cents on the dollar. By quietly rearranging their portfolios, saving less and dodging the tax, they rendered a lot of the wealth tax useless. Now when you combine the 22 cents lost to billionaires fleeing with the 54 cents lost to billionaires dodging inside the borders of your country, Your shiny new wealth tax loses 76% of its power. Only 24 cents on every krona, pound or dollar could theoretically be collected. So, adjusting our back of the napkin calculation for the UK, that 2% billionaire tax would not bring in 7.8 billion. It would bring in closer to 2.4 billion, a microscopic 0.70% of total UK government spend.
Nice.
And just while this calculation is very rough, estimations are based just on the evidence from Sweden and Denmark, it is actually consistent with what we know from countries that still run wealth taxes. In Norway, where the wealth tax targeted the upper classes in general, not just billionaires, so it brought in a little bit more, the wealth tax still brings in less than 2% of total government revenue. In Spain, that's even less. Not nothing, but nowhere near enough to bankroll the ambitious programs that politicians usually talk about when discussing wealth taxes. So, in conclusion, the evidence from the Scandinavian experience is clear. You can tax the rich more, and while it will cause some billionaires to leave, absolutely, it will not cause a true billionaire exodus. But, sadly, wealth taxes are no miracle solution. Even if billionaires did not react to them, they would just bring in a fraction of government revenue, simply because billionaires do not own that much compared to how much the government spends each year. Yet if we take into account that some billionaires do leave, and the ones that stay behind abuse the fact that you cannot easily value private companies, you should expect that only 24 cents will be left for every dollar, pound or euro that wealth taxes should theoretically raise. So should we just give up on taxing billionaires altogether? No, that's not the point of this video at all. While it is contested, the evidence that billionaires pay a lower tax rate in most countries than even the middle class is pretty strong. So the tax system is what they call regressive, at least at the very top. Most on the political left want to see a progressive tax system instead. And on the right, are some voices that would want a flat tax, the same rate for everyone that is. But even on the right, there are not many people that argue that billionaires should pay a lower tax rate than the middle class. So for a smart politician, there is actually a lot of political capital available to make the tax system more fair. People genuinely probably want that. And sure, we have seen today some pretty compelling evidence that wealth taxes alone are unlikely to be a miracle solution. But that doesn't mean that the tax system is impossible to fix. It just means that if you want the rich to pay their fair share, you will need to find the right mix of income taxes, capital gains taxes, wealth taxes, exit taxes, and inheritance taxes.
Yeah, like wealth tax, like the reason why I'm not for it, it just doesn't make any sense on a fundamental level. You should always do taxes after the fact, never like during something. So like, because like it destroys like utility of capital, and it makes it harder to collect those taxes because like there's so much guesswork you have to do. But yeah, like inheritance taxes, GSTs, income taxes, capital gains, all the stuff after the fact of something being sold or profit being made, that is just easy as fuck to tax. So you'd be focusing more on that.
To make tax dodging as hard as it can possibly be. You may also need to come together with other countries, or sometimes even within states, to coordinate taxes in such a way that they work in a world where there is free trade and free movement of capital. Not an easy task, but it is possible for people who are willing to think a bit beyond simplistic wealth tax proposals. And for those people, I highly recommend you check out the excellent analysis by our advertising sponsor, The Economist, which I always check out for the research process.
What is the net worth of the world? We are always told that the global economy is wealthier now than it ever has been before. Sure, we have persistent issues, like widening inequality, the environmental trade-offs we made to achieve that wealth, and the mounting debt that could undermine it. But to punctuate all of these issues, economists are always still quick to highlight that the economy is wealthier today than it ever has been before. But exactly how wealthy is that? Well, the simple answer, or at least the best answer we have, is about $600 trillion US, or about $75,000 per person on average for every last man, woman and child on Earth. That is 4 times more wealthy than we were back in the year 2000, with our collective wealth almost doubling over just the past 10 years alone. This is especially impressive since over the same time global GDP has increased by a comparatively modest 40%. And not to spoil too much just yet, but that alone is some cause for concern. I would go ahead and hazard a guess that a majority of you watching do not feel twice as wealthy today as you did 10 years ago. Even ignoring the issue of inequality entirely, we may actually be getting too rich too quickly in too many unideal ways. If the value of someone's land doubles, they are technically twice as wealthy.
Yep.
But are they really 2 times better off? Beyond even something like a housing crisis, these bulges in wealth creation can actually be quite detrimental to genuine economic prosperity. So working out the net worth of the world may just sound like a fun little thought experiment, but tracking this wealth may actually end up being just as, if not more important than measured like GDP for assessing the true health of the global economy. So, why don't we look at this statistic more often? What is our current global wealth actually made up of? And finally, are we building the right kind of wealth? At its core, wealth isn't really money. Money's just a scoreboard. Actual wealth is value, and every time somebody pays you for a good or a service, value is created on both sides of that transaction. These exchanges are as old as civilization itself, but the infrastructure that lets ordinary people participate in them as sellers, not just buyers, is newer than you'd think. And a lot of that is down to today's sponsor, Shopify. Shopify is an all-in-one commerce...
Ad.
Or click the link in our description. If you're a regular listener, you're probably familiar with many of the indicators we use to discuss the health of an economy. Unemployment rates, CPI and PPI to measure inflation and trade balances, and the most popular GDP or gross domestic product.
Yep.
GDP, as the name implies, is a measurement of the total monetary value of goods and services produced in a given country over a specific period of time. It's normally calculated using an expenditure approach, simply adding up all the money spent on purchasing finished goods or services. The actual formula is the sum of consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. It's popular because it's a simple proxy to measure the economic output and implied health of a country's economy. Countries that produce more are generally considered better off and to have a higher standard of living. But what typically is referenced most is comparative growth. When GDP is growing year over year, businesses are producing and likely hiring more, and in turn people are making more and spending more, all good signs of a humming economy. But when GDP declines year over year, you get the opposite. And when it does so for more than 2 consecutive quarters, you get a recession. Spending and investment are shrinking, employment declines, and consumer spending dries up. Now that we've covered what GDP is, let's touch quickly on what it's not. For one, it's not all-encompassing. Unpaid work and black market activities are not included because there is no exchange of payment, or it's not tracked because it's illegal. This means that not all productivity is captured. For example, a business hiring someone to paint their new office would be included in GDP. Having it done by volunteers would not, despite the productive outcome being the same. It also takes no account of the wear and tear or depreciation of assets used in production, a real economic cost. More importantly though, GDP is not a measure of wealth or a country's net worth. It is simply a measure of economic flows or activity. Think of it like this. If you're a productive member of society and have a high-paying job making $200,000 a year, your personal GDP looks great. You're being paid for your production at work, you're spending, and you're likely getting a raise every year. If you were a country, you'd be a humming economy. But your personal GDP is essentially a summary of your pay stubs and spending at the end of the year. It tells us nothing of your actual financial position, other than the fact that you are producing.
That's where my beloved PPP comes in. My beloved PPP.
And consuming. If you have no savings, or worse, are in debt, things aren't as good as your income and spending would imply. I imagine you can begin to see the limitations of this metric. Put on your investor cap for a minute. Public companies, those you can buy shares of on a stock exchange, keep meticulous accounting records that are audited and released as financial statements for public viewing. They are the income statement, the balance sheet or net worth statement, and a cash flow statement. All three are interconnected and feed into each other in various ways. Now, if we were to analyse a company's suitability as an investment, would simply looking at the income statement suffice? I would argue, as I'm sure many investors would, that seeing what a company earns and spends without knowing what it owns, saves, and owes offers little to no insight into the actual value of the business. In fact, the world's most famous investor, Warren Buffett, often notes that he spends more time looking at balance sheets than income statements. And that's because a balance sheet reveals the true net worth and underlying financial strength of a business. In the context of understanding the global economy, GDP is most similar to looking at a company's income statement. And that's all we've been referencing. To get a real understanding of a nation's or the world's economic health, we need to be looking at its balance sheet. We need to know its net worth. So, if it's so obvious, why don't we? Well, first, tracking GDP is a pretty straightforward process because it's based on transactions, and conveniently, transactions leave an easy-to-follow paper trail. Governments can simply add up the receipts and get a fairly accurate picture of their country's GDP. In contrast, looking at global net worth through the lens of a consolidated balance sheet is much more complex. While many nations have kept national accounts throughout history, serious global adoption of a standardized system for national accounting didn't really take hold until the 1990s. And even still, the standards are constantly being updated and revised. And where GDP is measured in easily tracked transactions, determining a global net worth is based on valuations. And valuations are often based on a collection of assumptions and educated guesses. Think about it like this. If you buy a fleet of new trucks, it's pretty simple to account for the value of the transaction and to record it in GDP. But what are a nation's natural resources, its intellectual property, or more recently, its AI models worth? What is a property worth if there's no recent market exchange? These are just a few of the complexities that come with building a national balance sheet. Expound that out across the globe and you find yourself trying to consolidate data developed according to varying methods of measurements in different countries into a standardized set of statistics that make sense. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. But it isn't for a lack of effort. The internationally accepted system of national accounts is a robust guide for doing so. But even still, its valuation methodologies are a collection of hierarchies and tier lists that simply often end with a best guess when all else fails. And it constantly requires updating. The bottom line is, determining the net worth of the world requires a lot of statisticians, economists and researchers doing a lot of work. Political preference is also probably at play here. GDP is a popular, relatively easy to understand metric to point to as a talking point about the economy. Discussions of net worth and wealth statistics, on the other hand, open a whole can of worms many politicians would probably prefer to avoid. And until recently, growth in GDP did serve as a pretty good proxy for wealth increases. Net worth and GDP have historically moved in sync on a global level, but since the year 2000, the two growth rates have diverged. In 2020, global net worth peaked at 6.1 times GDP, up nearly 50% from its long-term historical average, before settling in at about 5.4 times today, far outpacing the world's modest GDP growth over the same time frame. And it is primarily being driven by increases in asset prices. So what exactly is going on here? Well,
Hey, Billy. How's it going? Oh, that's good. Just got back after playing tennis. Oh shit, look at this guy. Athletic motherfucker. Do you have any other hobbies, or is tennis the only thing you do? Tennis and lopping. Oh, what, like as in like D&D, or role play? Or both? Oh shit, like that. I know what you're talking about, like the military stuff. Yeah, the reenactments. Have you reenacted the war that I forget what the war name was, but the war which the British took ended up taking up control of Gibraltar? Have you ever done that?
to try and figure that out, we have to understand what the world's wealth is actually made up of. To build our global balance sheet, we start by adding up our assets. Here, global wealth is split into three main buckets: financial assets and liabilities held by financial corporations, financial assets and liabilities held by households, governments, and non-financial corporations, and non-financial or real assets. Together, these assets
No, we only do the main stuff like Indian Revolution, World War I, World War II. Indian Revolution as in, like, the actual Indian Revolution? Not like Native Americans, right? English Civil War, okay. No, Indian as in I'm India. I'm not, I'm... The autocorrect gods got him. I'm not, as in India. Okay, that's cool. How long have you been laughing for?
Assets add up to over $1.7 quadrillion. Now, normally we would add up and subtract liabilities to get to the world's net worth, and we can. The financial liabilities of the world add up to $1.11 trillion in IOUs, but we don't really need to. That's because
Like 2 months. Oh shit, so it's very recent. Huh. Do you see like a lot of military and or ex-military guys doing it? Because like I see like whenever I look at these people who do reenactments, they always come from like a specific background. It's either dads who are really bored or like ex-military or military guys. Like that's what I've seen at least. Whenever I see these reenactments happening.
well, since the world only lends to the world, every single debt is just someone else's asset. Now, typically when we hear the word liabilities, we think debt, and in that context, $1.11 quadrillion in total liabilities sounds extreme. But in the context of
I used to have like firearms, but like I can't handle shooting animals anymore. Oh shit! What did you have like a traumatic experience? Oh, you just decided that that's gay and cringe.
financial accounting, every financial asset has an offsetting liability. These liabilities include much more than traditional debt, which as of 2024 actually sits at around
Nah, it's kind of brutal. Okay. Oh, are you like a vegan or is it just more like you just want to kill animals? I'm just gonna ban this guy. Give me a second.
2.9 times global GDP, or roughly $322 trillion, which is obviously still a lot of money, but not quite into the 15 digits yet. These financial liabilities include everything from pensions to really simple stuff like money held in deposit with a bank. That bank holds onto the cash, which is an asset, but ultimately it does owe it to its depositors, which is a liability. If we strip away all this financial technicality though, these instruments are ultimately just accounting tools to keep track of who owns what portion
All right. Sorry. I'm back. I had to go deal with some stuff. Sorry, what was this? I just get uncomfortable around death, bro. Evaporated. I did not evaporate. I just had to do some stuff in real life, believe it or not. I have human connections.
Of the world's real assets. While individuals
Wait, Billy, how do you... Because obviously you're part of the military. Granted, it's the Navy. But how do you marry the uncomfortable around death thing and being part of the military? How do you marry those two things?
and households would rightfully consider their financial assets of stock and bonds in calculating their net worth, on a global scale, all the world's loans, bonds, and bank deposits eventually net to zero. So, the net worth of the real world is really just the value of our real assets, or about 600 trillion US dollars. The fact that we have almost 2 times that amount tied up in paper assets to represent this real wealth is kind of part of the problem. Real assets are the tangible and intangible things that act as true stores of value or as inputs for production. It includes all of the things we make: houses, infrastructure, and intellectual property, and the valuable things we claim.
I use therapy. I don't like killing. I just know I have to protect my country. Okay, you know what? That's like a fair statement. Like, because obviously duty, when you have a duty to do and when you've signed up to do something, there's some sort of moral responsibility you have to actually commit to that. I can actually respect the fact that, you have a certain moral position, but like you understand that, you've signed up to do something and you have to do it. That's respectable.
Like land, minerals, and even rights to exploit naturally occurring stores like fisheries or woodlands. Surprisingly, despite all the hoopla about AI models and technological advancements, real estate still accounts for over 2/3 of all real assets. Think of that.
Kill me,
Nearly
dude.
70% of all of humanity's cumulative wealth is simply the structures we've built and the land we live on. The remaining third is made up of everything else. Despite living in the age of technology and information, things like intellectual property and developed software actually account for less than 5% of the world's wealth. It is important to note, though, that despite not making the cut as actual wealth due to some quirky nuances of accounting on a global scale, the financial assets and liabilities on our global balance sheet do play an important role. While real assets are the capital that allow us to generate wealth and invest in greater capacities to generate more wealth, the financial buckets of the balance sheet in practice are what actually make it all possible, through the shifting and transferring of risk and finances between parties to facilitate that investment. Take the development and purchase of a new home, for example. In this scenario, a bank issues a mortgage to a household to purchase a newly built home. It's the creation of financial assets and liabilities using consumer banking deposits and a mortgage loan that allow for the movement of funds that make the purchase of a real asset, the home, and its pass-through value in income to the home builder possible. But more on this later. Now that we know what wealth is, who actually owns it all? If we are valuing the world as we would a public corporation, who are the shareholders? Households. Households account for roughly 95% of total wealth ownership in the world, and consequently, much of the gain over the past 2 decades. Heading into 2025, households had a net worth of $539 trillion, up nearly $400 trillion from 25 years ago. They hold this wealth via 2 roughly equal avenues: owning real assets, primarily residential real estate, and
This is poison, by the way. This is like economic poison. Okay, if our wealth went up and it was through housing, we're so... Wait, where is it? Where is it? I can't find the soundboard thing, but we are just so fucked. We are so fucked.
indirectly through financial assets such as stocks, bonds, and deposits. Despite netting out on a global scale, individuals and households rightfully consider financial assets as a component of net worth. This is because, through financial assets, households actually hold claim on the wealth generated by the rest of the economy. You might assume that corporations would fit somewhere into the breakdown of wealth.
I think if housing and other stuff, the wealth goes up, and those are good, but if it's only housing, that's bad. I've said this a lot on Scream Billy. The worst thing we did in the 20th and the 21st century was making housing an asset. Housing should be a commodity, bought and sold based on supply and demand. Because there is no productive value to a house. Like, the whole point of an investment is you put money into something because you're assuming that in the later years it's going to be productive and make more value than the money you put in. Other than speculation that comes out of like a pig's asshole, there is no actual value being added to a property given over time. Like, the materials don't become luxury in the span of a couple of years. It doesn't get classified as vintage. It truly is just like one of the few things in our economics that is just like valuated because people just think it should be valuated like that. There is no actual productive value to a house. I buy a house because I need a home. They buy. Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. It's like making housing an asset is the most retarded thing we did as a society. Okay? And the problem is, you know what the worst part is, Billy? There are a lot of problems you can blame on rich people for not systemically changing. This problem is a middle class issue. Because if you want to systemically fix housing, you have to nuke the middle class's wealth, because a lot of their wealth is tied up in housing. Like, the rich throw their money to, like, index funds and, like, megacorps and, like, overseas, like, investments and shit. But, like, middle class people who only have, like, a couple $100,000 to play with, or like a couple million, they're all in the housing markets, all in on the most retarded shit ever.
Ownership in the world, but you'd be wrong. In fact, corporations do not actually own wealth. Yes, they technically occupy buildings and operate machinery, but those real assets are matched by financial liabilities on their corporate balance sheet, the debt they owe and the equity they issue. Ultimately, corporations are owned by shareholders, and those shareholders are primarily households. Now, the majority of the world's wealth being held by households is a good thing. It's a pillar of personal economic stability and a sharing of the world's prosperity. Ultimately, the world is made up of households, and households consist of real people.
This is true, by the way. So, like, you actually want your debt in a nation, even globally, to be a household debt thing, because it shows demand. It shows that people are actually willing to consume and take on certain levels of private debt. Because if it was just all corporations, it kind of shows you that shit's fucked. Like, people are not actually able or willing to participate in the economy. I wonder what happened if you, as a leader, sold your own country. The problem is you don't need to ask that, Billy, okay? You just have to ask Nigel Farage what that was like. He sold it to the Russians when he did Brexit.
However, distribution of household wealth in the world remains heavily skewed. It is by no means equal. In 2024, the top 1% of global households accounted for more than 20% of all wealth. In the United States, it's even worse, with the top 1% holding 35% of total wealth, or the equivalent of 5% of global wealth. Despite having a real per capita wealth of $470,000, far above the global per capita of $75,000, the bottom 50% of US households only have $9,000 in wealth per person. That's technically worse off than the bottom 50% in China, while the top 1% enjoy a staggering $16.4 million each. While extreme, the US is not alone. The top 1% of the world's most advanced economies own somewhere around 25% of the wealth in their respective nations. And the problem with wealth is that as asset values outpace economic growth, the exact divergence we are exploring here, those who own the assets become wealthier, further entrenching the existing inequality. The rest is held by governments and pretty much includes your typical public sector properties, infrastructure, public land, and natural resources. But like households, not all government balance sheets are created equal. If you're a regular viewer, you've heard your fair share about governments and their debt, and lucky for you, you get to hear about it again today. But only briefly, I promise. In the US and UK, the governments have a significant negative net worth despite their nation's overall ownership of wealth, because they have high levels of public debt in comparison to their public assets. China, on the other hand, has a large government net worth, nearly equal to that of its households. This is because, unlike...
I don't know if you guys know, I'm going to let you know because I'm a massive China hater, okay? The funny thing about Chinese debt is that you'll never know what it actually is, because the way the Chinese government operates is at a provincial level. So the way they interact with global markets and global currencies is dealt with the central government. But whenever they're doing local development, money printing, all that kind of stuff, all their debt is provincially held. So the provinces can be like in the most dogshit economic condition, but no one will actually know about it other than the Chinese government. So just a little tidbit for you.
Like its Western counterparts, the Chinese government owns large amounts of land and massive equity in state-owned enterprises. As we've already discussed on the global scale, every dollar of debt is simply someone else's asset. This creates an observable dynamic between...
Big hate the government, not the race, ethnic group. Yeah, no, I hate the Chinese government. I be very like, if I'm gonna be real with you, Billy, this is a hot take incoming. Like, I'm a big America, like, I'm very bullish on America as a country. If the Chinese were democratic and capitalist, there would be a Chinese flag behind me. Because like right now, the American government's on like retard mode. They need to like wake the fuck up because like shit's happening. Okay.
Nations that we can think of as savers versus spenders. When a country consumes and invests more than it saves domestically, that capital has to come from somewhere. And in this case, it comes from the net saver nations. This is particularly impactful
Oh,
and
so-
most visible.
Another economic fun fact, by the way, is Japan has actually the most debt to GDP ratio, I think, in the world. But the funny thing is that it's not a problem for them because they own a lot of assets. Now, what are those assets, you'll ask? It's bonds of countries like the US, so their debt is balanced by the debt of another nation. It's a debt industrial complex. I have a Hong Kong flag because I think they're cool, yeah. Glory to the people of Hong Kong, okay? I want them to be liberated and free as they once were.
In the United States. Because the US runs persistent federal budget deficits, it needs to issue debt to fund its spending, and that debt, in the form of US treasuries, attracts capital from the net saver nations like Canada, Germany, and Japan. Fortunately for the US, treasuries are considered the world's most risk-free asset, and there is, at least for now, no shortage of foreign savers looking to deploy their excess cash. Add the fact that the US economy and stock market are the favoured investment destination of the world, there is a major and consistent inflow of savings from abroad flowing into US bonds and equities. While this helps drive investment into productive assets in the US, it also has an impact on interest rates, driving them down and subsequently driving up asset valuations. Speaking of valuations, if wealth growth is far outpacing GDP growth, what exactly is driving this recent spike? Well, economically speaking, the best way to grow wealth is through value creation. Taking iron ore and processing it into the metals used to make a machine that allows the transformation...
Yeah, remember, this is the thing I brought up with housing. Like, with housing, the moment a construction worker leaves a housing site, the economic, like, productivity of that asset it's stopped. It's no longer there. It's just a thing now. In fact, it depreciates, technically, over time, because the materials get older.
Of more raw materials into finished goods faster and more efficiently than before. Take, for example, a man hired to dig holes. At first, he uses his bare hands. He's paid based on his output, but he's not very...
Started chatting with me for a while, still think I'd make a great governor, lol. You... Hawthorne, you know, to be a great governor, you just have to be a great person. And you know what? You're an amazing person. Guy's hot take, in the current political climate, being a dick to a minority isn't good. That's a very hot take. I don't know why you would, like, well, why would you say this in this stream? I might ban you for that. Yeah, no, like, yeah. Like, being racist is a bit cringe, no? Like, I can get being ironically racist in, like, a funny way or whatever, but, like, if you're genuinely racist, that's a cringe, dude. Come on, bro. In the Big 26? Really?
Efficient. It takes him a full day to dig one hole and he earns $10. So he decides to take his hard-earned money and invests it in buying a shovel. His wealth has technically increased by the price of the shovel, an asset, but more importantly so, has his productivity. In the time it used to take him to dig a hole by hand, now he can dig 3. This is a silly oversimplification of the process, but whether talking about this man or the global...
Racists are like level 0. Haters, I'm level 100. I look past race to just need to get to my level. Yeah, true. Most people think that an all-white group is incredibly racist in the reverse, get a mixed race. Yeah, dude, like, don't get me wrong, like, white people being racist is like the whole thing of power or whatever. It's like white supremacy and that kind of shit is like, obviously, with those guys out doing certain salutes and wave flags, it means a lot more. But, bro, immigrants are the most racist people you'll ever see in your life. Like, they'll outwardly say shit like white people like shake and tremble to like even think of. But yeah, Billy, to your point, yeah, like, I don't hate people because they're race, okay? I hate people because they're retarded. Alright, I'm above insulting people for their phenotypes.
economy, the point remains the same. In our simple example, that $10 shovel actually increased the man's personal GDP by 3 times
I'm retardophobic.
as much. If we were increasing wealth by investing in productive assets, or shovels in this case, we would expect productivity measured by GDP to keep pace or even accelerate beyond wealth growth. But that's not what's happening. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Net worth has increased. Expect that's not what's happening by GDP to keep
What is a shoveling technique? He wasn't even digging anything.
pace or even accelerate beyond wealth growth. But that's not what's happening. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Net worth has increased at a far greater pace than GDP, particularly over the last 2 decades, and now sits 50% higher relative to income than its historical norms. And the vast majority of growth on the global balance sheet is in non-productive assets. Our global wealth is growing, but it is not being invested in value-producing assets. The reality is that the valuation of our existing assets
No, what I meant to say is that those friend group listening racist shit, they never would have otherwise because they know their friends are cool with it. Like being that one black friend in the friend group and all pull. Oh yeah, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, okay, yeah, no, that's that. Yeah, that is also a thing too. Like the whole like token person or whatever. I just think if you hate someone for mental disability, sexual, race, religion, yeah, you cry, you're being oppressed, it's kind of dumb. You are generally not you. Yeah, like when I say mental retardation, I'm talking about very specific classes of people. I've met people who are like mentally disabled, and I know that I've seen these people, and I would say confidently I've met people who are like who have no mental disabilities who are like have a lower IQ than these people.
is skyrocketing, but our ability to produce more value is not. Simply put, price increases are what is driving our growing net worth. A staggering 75% of net worth growth since 2000 has been driven by price increases. And it's not simply inflation.
I'm watching a hide and seek game, and the hider says his eyes are wide open, yet he can't find anyone. And one of the hiders says, "How wide can they be?" Okay.
Inflation only actually accounted for roughly 38% of the price
I
growth
love
over
it.
that same period.
Yeah, like
1/3 was simply
like the whole point of a racist joke is like there are some stereotypes you kind of understand, and if you use them in a playful way, they can be very funny. But it's like when it's targeted and consistent and like because a joke is supposed to be a joke because you don't believe it. That's the point. But if you genuinely believe it, you're just stating a fact you believe, and like, playing it off as a joke, which is not. Like there's a very fine line when it comes to like stuff like edgy humor.
paper wealth creation, and investment only accounted for 28%. This divergence between price-driven wealth increases and that driven by investments is problematic.
Joke is funny when like not just content but also its intention. Intention puts a lot to like a joke. Because like if you are just a white supremacist and you're making black jokes, that has a different meaning than like a black guy making black jokes. Fun fact: the Asians have small eyes is not only wrong; it's mainly East Asia, and second, it's below to be evolution to withstand. Yeah, everybody's phenotypes are made for their environment, obviously.
For a number of reasons. For one, if asset prices continue to outpace GDP...
Alright, wait, chuds, my hands are sticky as fuck. I'm gonna go wash my hands. I really need to buy like hand sanitizer. Alright, I'm back. Wonder why.
and income growth, people need to dedicate more and more of their budgets to buying these stores of wealth, things like housing, and have less money left over to invest in productive assets because they can barely meet their monthly mortgage payments. And this becomes a bit of a self-reinforcing cycle. As non-productive asset valuations have soared, the gains they provide in excess of inflation are on par with, or at times outpacing, operating returns of productive assets. This creates an incentive for investors to chase asset appreciation returns in the form of equities and real estate over real economic investments. In fact, the price of housing, the primary allocation of household net worth, has tripled since 2000 and sits well beyond the historical norm. With no sign...
Wait a minute, what the fuck's my... Oh, here it is. Found it. Alright, I'm back for real now.
signs of coming down. Prolonged periods of low or near 0% interest rates have done us no favours.
Mashallah.
Low savings yields have sent households seeking returns in equities to outpace inflation, and low costs of borrowing have allowed them to take on massive mortgages to outbid competitors in tight housing markets. Coincidentally, or more likely not, those low interest rates started in 2001, as did this divergence between net worth and GDP. But if income growth isn't keeping pace with asset prices, something needs to fill the gap. And you guessed it, it's debt. For every $1 of investment, we are generating $2 of debt. We've got to pay for those houses somehow. And yet again...
I'm doing fine, Ganju. Thank you for not listening to me to continue to try and use that word. I just woke up and you're alive, yeah. Oh yeah, like, cause like it's 5:35 p.m. where I am, so yeah.
And we run into the dilemma of where scarce dollars end up. For
I
every
can't
extra
say the
dollar
word
that
on
goes into
this
paying
stream.
down debt, there is one less available for productive investment.
Yeah, Ganja's a bit of he's got they don't try to. Ganja's got like 10 billion ways of like skirting my rules. he's an N-word evader.
All of that is to say that more and more money is paying down debt or chasing wealth generation and asset price appreciation and not flowing into productive.
Like, bro, the amount of times I've had to deny messages in chat because he's like said the N-word in some degree or some regard, it's some crazy shit. Like, Ganja, I'm onto you.
Assets. And GDP simply can't keep up if investment in productive assets aren't being prioritised. The thing is, households rarely actually directly invest productive tools themselves, they buy shares in companies that buy the tools. Through this lens, we can essentially think of companies themselves as productive machines. So by investing in companies, households are investing in productive assets by proxy. But a company's
No, it's not what this channel's gonna be. I am not gonna be the N-word channel.
That's because companies are more than the physical machinery they own. They are a business made up of a corporate culture, industry expertise, brand power, and more. These intangible assets don't always show up on a balance sheet, and when they do, they are rarely fully valued. What's more is that when you buy a share of a company on the stock market, you are buying the rights to a share of its future profits, not just its current assets. And the price you pay is a premium multiple that reflects an anticipation of those future profits and their potential growth. In hot stock markets like the United States, however, enterprise.
Have you seen a kiwi bird before in the wild? Once. Once in the wild. In like my decades, my billions of years of living, I've barely seen them out in the wild, mostly in the zoos. Because they're very rare. And although they're native to New Zealand, like they're not extinct, but they're like, I think what's the word for it? It's like they got like some protection status. Did you just put crack in your mouth? Yes, I did. I put crack in my mouth. My favorite TikTok creator is a guy who takes homeless people to flex. Of course, that's your favorite type of creator, Ganju. What else would I expect?
Valuations of publicly traded companies have entirely detached from their underlying asset or book values. In fact, the total value of US corporate equity liability.
I seen a gang of Kiwis. They were 6 in a little hole. Oh, that's cute. That's cute as hell.
Far exceeds the value of the assets they own, even excluding their debt, by 1.8 times. So, if equity valuations are being pushed higher and higher, there are obviously more than enough people willing to invest in productive companies. So, where is the increase in productivity? Well, people are buying shares in companies. A record 58% of US households are participating in the capital market.
I want to pet them, but I know, yeah, like the kiwi being our like national bird makes a lot of sense because just like an average kiwi, they're kind of retarded. Like they have no real survival mechanisms. So if you get close to them, because their whole, because obviously because like there weren't any prey animals in New Zealand before like other humans came, their entire defense mechanism was literally just like sit there and do nothing because they had camouflage. But yeah, like rats and possums didn't really give a fuck and they just eat them alive when they do that. What should I do to make clothes bad? One time we got home, this guy to act George Floyd, and then I thought, okay, alright. Oh no, they lunge at you for some reason. Oh really? Okay. Usually Kiwis just like stand still and do nothing if they get freaked out. Look up the national animal of Scotland. Fucking unicorn. Okay, man. Yes, so true, Scotland. Pop off, Queen. Pop off.
Markets primarily through equities, and they hold a lot of them, roughly 38% of the total market. And while individual
It's because of like anti-English stuff, yeah. Fucking unicorn, dude.
investments and retirement contributions have created a near constant inflow of new money into the equity market to the tune of $753 billion in 2025, there has been an even bigger buyer. corporations themselves.
The magical unicorn,
In
the
the
Scottish
12
animal,
months
like
ending
Loch
September
Ness, true.
2025, corporations purchased
Have you
a
ever made the
staggering
CIA happy and
1,020
hang out
trillion
with the
US
homeless
dollars
people in the
of their
casino?
own shares, up 11%.
No, the problem is whenever the Mossad gives me my checks, they tell me specifically not to hang around the homeless because they're goy. So yeah. And Wales is the red dragon as implies during the white dragon again. Okay. Sure, how high are you? Gotcha. That is a tinfoil hell.
From the year prior. So households are piling money into corporations as a seeming
The unicorn
proxy
was
for
chosen
productive
because of
investment.
purity and
But rather
innocence.
than reinvesting their profits into real tools to improve productivity, those same corporations are just buying back their own shares and are just bidding up the price of their already inflated stock, all in the name of shareholder return. And while valid, on paper at least, that shareholder return is part of the problem. Wealth is increasing wealth, not productivity. And that brings us to another problem. Most of the time, people equate wealth with cash, but they are not one and the same. Under the global accounting rules we discussed earlier, assets on national balance sheets are valued at current market prices or via indices that account for them. This means wealth is largely determined by the last price something sold at. You'll often see headlines noting trillions of dollars added or lost in the stock market. But the reality is, $1 trillion didn't go anywhere. It wasn't pulled out. In fact, it wasn't even real to begin with. That's because it isn't money, it is a valuation on paper. Stocks are valued by applying the last transacted price across all current shareholdings. So the value of your investments can go up and down on a daily basis at the whims of the market sentiment when the
Stupid, like overly using the word in front of. Look, Billy, for some context, Ganju is a Russian. So he's got a little different views on people who aren't Russian, you know?
underlying business value didn't actually change at all. Think of it like this. You have a collection of 10 shiny rocks. One day, one of your friends walks by and offers you $1 for one of your rocks. You sell it and now your friend has one and you are left with 9. Using market pricing logic combined, the collection of rocks is worth a total value of $10. You have $9 of wealth and your friend has 1. Some time goes by and a passerby sees you and your friend standing there with your rocks and they want in. They make the same offer, $1 for 1 rock, but neither of you wants to sell. So they up the ante and offer you $2 for 1 rock. You happily accept. Now, based on the most recent transaction price, you have 8 rocks that are worth $16 in total, and you've got $3 in your pocket. That's great. You actually have less tangible assets, but they are suddenly worth more. And your friend is happy too. His $1 in rocks is now $2.
Also, this is an announcement for all you losers, okay? I've got a Discord now for the community. It should be linked in my Twitch shit. So, you can, like, apply to join it or whatever, if you guys want to do some after community stuff or whatever.
It doubled in value, and so did his wealth. The rock market is ripping. It gained $20 of value in a single day. But nothing about the rocks or the people that hold them actually changed. They are still the same rocks. Silly story, but hopefully you get the gist of it. Valuation and wealth are not based on cash. They are an assumed worth based on the latest market transactions. So while it might be the best current means of applying a standardized valuation, there's a whole host of problems. Take equities as an example. Hopefully our little story about rocks can help you see how stock market bubbles and crashes can happen without any major underlying changes in the businesses being bought and sold. Someone could theoretically gain or lose millions in wealth without actually doing anything by simply sitting on their shares while others bid up the prices or sell in a panic. It's a bit nonsensical. And as such, a major influencing factor in the pricing of assets is the amount of money available. With more money poured...
Yes, like, I don't think the slurs themselves are hate speech. It's like how it's used. Like, if I was just say the N-word, it's like, you know, a room by myself, it's not a crime. But if you use it against someone who that slur is like targeted to, that's a hate crime.
Into the system, especially following COVID, as governments issued things like stimulus checks and central banks embarked on massive quantitative easing programs, more households suddenly had more cash to pay for the same assets, pushing up asset prices and global net worth without any real tangible value actually being created. If you were wondering how the world created $3.50 of new wealth for every $1 of net new investment in the last 25 years, well, there's your answer. But now, as of late, nations and economies have been grappling with the after effects of loose monetary policy and low interest rates. Inflation. And as such, central banks have had to raise interest rates and many have started to actively shrink their balance sheets.
You know, Ganjo, I respect the hustle. You woke up and you immediately got into an N-word debate. That's, like, respectable to some degree. As degenerate as it is.
Through quantitative tightening. The money supply is starting to shrink. In the current dynamic of the global balance sheet, that's a precarious situation to be in. If sentiment shifts and people suddenly attempt to cash out on their paper wealth en masse by selling their investments into an environment where money is tighter, well, now you have a scenario where more assets are chasing fewer dollars. And the global economy risks entering a balance sheet reset. Remember, because asset prices are tied to market values and those values are determined by the last transacted price, a rush to sell causes market prices to plummet, vaporizing trillions of dollars in paper wealth, as balance sheets assets are revalued at drastically
Even in
prices.
Somalia.
And with balance sheets burdened by debt, many households and governments could suddenly find themselves underwater on their obligations. And worse, as asset prices drop, already elevated loan-to-value ratios spike, forcing households and governments to painfully deleverage, selling more assets and cutting back on spending to prioritise paying down debt. Think post-1990 Japan. A deep recession, massive asset price corrections, and a period of stagnation. It's not pretty. So, how can it be avoided? Well, the most optimal way is by accelerating productivity. By accelerating GDP growth faster than asset and debt values, real economies can catch up to their inflated balance sheets and reach a healthier equilibrium. And coincidentally, the world is kind of positioned to pivot into this outcome. The AI boom has led to a massive investment cycle, particularly in the US. Over the last 15 years, investments in R&D and capital expenditures by the largest tech companies have increased by 19 times, with no signs of slowing down. And if we're lucky, this
don't like
investment in
dark
AI
humor.
might turn out to
I'm a big dark humor enjoyer. But like, there's a difference between dark humor and whatever the fuck Ganji is talking about.
be the answer to our productivity problems. That is, unless Claude steals all our jobs in the meantime. But for now, it needs to be more structural than that. If we want a healthy, growing economy, we need to disincentivize households from simply hoarding unproductive assets and driving up their valuations with debt. Think about how we handle cash in our economy. Most central banks actually target a healthy amount of inflation, around 2%. Why? Well, to incentivize individuals to invest their cash to put it to productive use in the economy. With a 2% inflation rate, keeping your cash under the mattress for 10 years will erase 18% of its purchasing power.
Well, no, like, again, remember, like, being edgy, like, the whole point is, like, if you're making a racist joke, the joke is that you don't actually believe that. It's just, like, you're using stereotypes or whatever to make the joke. But, like, if you actually believe it, it's, like, a different fucking story.
That's a pretty good disincentive to not do that. Now we need a similar tool for unproductive assets. There are a few options, and they revolve around taxes.
No, you won't. Yeah, gotcha. I'm sorry, like... I know in Russia, freedom of speech is something you guys haven't even experimented with, but, like, trust me, brother, you will not win that case.
In this scenario, we aren't talking
A good racist joke is like fobbing the racist as idiot. Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I think I know what you're saying there.
about taxes to fill the budgetary gaps of irresponsible governments. Here, we are talking about incentives. In economics, you get more of what you subsidise and less of what you tax. Unfortunately, this basic premise is often lost on policymakers. But back to the point, one option is land value taxes. First and foremost, taxing empty land would inherently incentivise one to develop it, to put it to productive use. But there's a secondary effect here as well. Right now, most of the world implements some version of this through property taxes. But the problem is, property taxes are based on land and the property you build on it. Contrary to the goal, that actually disincentivises development. With land value taxes, you get the reverse effect. Taxes remain the same in lieu of whatever you build on it, thereby incentivizing you to develop more, not less.
Yeah, that's true.
Along those same lines are things like vacant property levies for unoccupied residences and second homes that are pushing up prices in already tight housing markets. Considering that the majority of wealth generation is coming in the form of housing, this makes sense. More investors are buying more houses in hopes of cashing out on simple price appreciation without putting it to any productive use in the meantime. Then we have
Let's
a
hear
wealth
Hawthorne.
tax, and this seems
Spit
to be
your shit.
quite controversial. If you're in the United States, you're likely familiar with California's ongoing efforts, and if you're from France, you are likely familiar with recently repealed Impôt de Solidarité, or Solidarity Tax on Wealth, though it was replaced by a more targeted wealth tax on property. Part of the problem is the world's patchwork policies that enable the billionaire flight from nations and states with wealth taxes. But here we're discussing a global problem, not a nation-specific one. Yet the core premise of the tax remains the same. If these assets are generating ongoing value, then these small taxes shouldn't really matter. It's a simple cost of doing business. On the other hand, if the value of the assets are entirely tied up in eventually being able to account for them at a higher price, well then a wealth tax is a problem. But that's the point. It's not about revenue, it's about incentives. If your capital is tied up in an asset that is actually costing you money instead of making it, then you will be more incentivized to invest it productively. With a simple tax, we can encourage the world's holders of unproductive wealth to seek returns through investment, the same way inflation pushes people to invest their cash. And just maybe, we can kickstart our economic production enough to catch up to our global net worth and avoid the problems that come if we don't. After all, if the majority of that 600
As a black person and Jew have in common, they would be sitting at the back. Come on, brother.
This week, following the sudden resignation of Keir Starmer on Monday, the United Kingdom is preparing to appoint its seventh Prime Minister in just 10 years. At this point, holding the highest office in British politics has started to look less like a prestigious constitutional honour and more like a temporary 0 hours contract at a local retail store where the management changes constantly, the customers are permanently furious, and you really shouldn't bother unpacking your personal belongings because you've seen how things went for the last 6 people who sat at that desk. The revolving door at 10 Downing Street has become such a fixture of British life that the only part of the economy showing reliable growth appears to be the London removal firms that specialise in transporting executive furniture at very short notice. Now, it would be easy.
To be fair, Gandhi, it really isn't a problem either if you get convicted. You've broken law. Like, that's just kind of how that works. Gandhi, why the fuck? You're never like this in chat. Like, why the fuck did you just wake up today and decide I want to defend using the N-word today? Like, you literally woke up and like, I need to do this. No, you don't have constitution. You live in Russia, dude. The strongest right you have is to pick up a gun and go die in Ukraine. That's the only right you have.
To look at all of this political churn and conclude that Britain has simply become the Italy of northwestern Europe. But that would be unfair to Italy, which over the same 10 years has looked like an oasis of predictability by comparison. This run of political volatility isn't just a matter of rotten luck, it's the direct
Light
legacy
powder,
that took
yeah.
place exactly 1 decade ago this week, the Brexit referendum of June 23rd, 2016. Now, there were 2 stories told about Brexit at the time, and the interesting thing, the thing that makes it such a good topic, is that both of them turned out to be wrong. The first story was told by the Leave campaign, who drove a large red bus around the UK with the words,
You're
sent
so
them
retarded.
350 million.
Yeah, like he definitely is trolling. Like
Let's
this is not like elite level trolling.
The pitch was that Britain was hemorrhaging money to Brussels, money that was being wasted, and that leaving would let the country reclaim its borders, slash bureaucracy, revitalise the health
I'm dead ass
service,
serious, Sean.
and most importantly, bring back the bendy banana. Which
Just like
the
you dead
EU
ass don't have
was
CP on your
supposed to
Telegram.
outlaw.
that's
This
how
was
dead ass you
promoted
are.
heavily by right-wing populists and, more surprisingly, by a smaller group of left-wing Eurosceptics who wanted to leave the EU not to deregulate the economy, but to regulate it far more aggressively than Brussels would ever allow. The 2 groups agreed on the destination and on absolutely nothing else. For the Leave campaign, Brexit was framed as a patriotic act to take back control of the nation's laws, money and borders, a democratic strike against the metropolitan elites in London who had spent decades managing a globalized economy while leaving the old
Realistically, with a
industrial
law case, it's a
heartlands
blaze
behind.
even if
The second story was told
that's not how
by
that
the
works,
Remain
dude. I'm not
side,
even an American,
and
and I
it
know
was
that.
Brexit would be an immediate catastrophe. In May 2016, 1 month before the vote, Her Majesty's Treasury published an analysis predicting that a Leave
He hit
vote
me with that.
would
It is
plunge
argument. It's
straight
over.
into
I've
a
lost.
year-long recession.
Fuck. How am I going to combat
Cost
that?
around 500,000
And I
jobs,
did it too.
leave GDP 3.6% smaller, collapse housing, weaken sterling, and lower real wages.
That was a fucking
They
nice
had
one.
an even gloomier scenario in the same document too, in which 820,000 jobs went. This was the official position of the British government. vote the wrong way on Thursday, and the economy falls over by the weekend. What actually happened was worse than Leave promised and a good deal milder than Remain threatened, which is the least satisfying result for everyone involved and the reason that the argument has never really ended. There was no immediate recession,
Oh, he
and
added
half
that.
a million
Okay.
people did not lose their
Freaking
jobs
me the
that
fuck out.
summer. Now, this does not mean that Brexit was fine, as we'll get to. It's been a disaster in ways that took years to show up. But it means that the question was always going to be more complicated than either camp was willing to admit on the side of a bus. The part of this story that matters most is who voted for Brexit and why.
I do increase my
During the
penalty for
boom
every
years,
individual
Britain's
that
welfare
his
state
base
had
IQ still
partly
wouldn't change.
compensated the people who lost out from deindustrialization and globalization. Then the financial crisis arrived, austerity followed, and the cushion was gradually removed from the people who were sitting on it. In the poorest parts of the country, cuts to benefits made a bad situation considerably worse. According to a recent piece in The Atlantic, the share of British children growing up in long-term poverty, meaning poor for half their childhood or more, rose from about 14% to 23%. So, you had a large group of people who, by their own fairly reasonable assessment, had very little left to lose. When the referendum